Welcome to the second of what we hope will be a 4-episode podcast series on this year's book for Visitation Parish, A Pilgrimage to Eternity. This is season 3 of our parish podcast, Viz on Main. Today's unedited episode will focus on some critical issues concerning religious faith that Tim Egan, Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist for the New York Times, raises in his book. Joining me today is Father Tom Curran, president of Rockhurst University. Father Tom also graciously volunteers to celebrate Mass at Visitation. I'm Lorraine Gordon, a member of the Visitation Faith Formation team. First of all, Father Tom, thank you for joining us today in this conversation about pilgrimage to eternity, and especially today, given that you walked in very cold and snowy weather. So thank you for coming. I guess I want to start by asking you that given the demands on your time, especially this past year, how did you come to read the book, and then what initial impressions did you have of it?
Well, firstly, thanks for the opportunity to be with you. I appreciate the invitation, and I'm grateful that you opened the door and let me inside so I can warm up and we can have the conversation. But kidding aside, it's good to be with you. How did I come across? It's kind of an interesting pilgrimage, if you will, just to the book itself. So I was first introduced to it by the brother of a parishioner, Mike Donnelly, who's the brother of Paul Donnelly, who's a parishioner, and Mike, like Paul, are connected with Rockhurst. Mike's a grad of the university, and I was visiting Mike and Peggy at their home in Westchester, Pennsylvania, as part of the university business, and we were talking about a variety of things about the university, and Mike referenced the book, and of course knew I'd done the Camino de Santiago and wanted to know about that. So that piqued my interest, and he spoke about the book. I was familiar with Egan because I'm a daily reader of the New York Times, so I'm familiar with his columns, but did not really know a whole lot other than that was one of the books that he had written. So that was the first piece, and so Mike's recommendation to come across that and consider it. The second was that it was reinforced, that invitation, if you will, because as I said, I read the Times daily, and reading more and more of his pieces, I just thought, I like what he has to say, I appreciate his insights, and so it was the second invite, if you will. And then lo and behold, because I help out here on Sundays, another providential moment, I walk by the back of the church, the narthex, and there is what I'll call the annual parish read. Right. To me, that was the third, and three's a charm. I need to pick up the book. So I asked, could I have a copy of it, and made it as one of my readings over the Christmas holidays. So that's how I came upon it, and I'm very glad I did. And so I think all of that happens, coincidences, in my opinion, and others, are God's way of acting anonymously.
Okay.
And so it was kind of meant to be read, and I did enjoy it. Took a lot out of it, and made a lot of notes, because everything I read, I usually put summations of it in my journal, which I brought along with me today, so I don't forget those things.
Well, we're really glad for the confluence of those events that occurred. So we're going to actually kind of start by talking about the book specifically. Before I ask you a question, I want to refer to a couple of scenes in the book. There's a scene where Tim is visiting the French town of Saint-Omer. And in that, he's delighted to find this trove of ancient manuscripts that are painstakingly created by medieval monks. But he asks this question. He says, who still listens to voices from the European literary cradle, slowly fading away in this nursing home of geriatric books? And actually, the director, who's very proud of his collection, also remarks, I can see a day when people won't have any idea what the religion in these books means. It is already happening. The students next door, they don't know what this is. They feel they don't have to know. Now, fast forward to a scene, again in France, the town of Vassy, which is a town that Tim seeks out because he wants to visit this barn where French Huguenot families were burned to death during the wars of religion. But he has trouble finding it, and he goes down, he thinks he's on the right street. He goes to a couple of sites, and he knocks on the door, and there's this young Frenchman And he says, you know, this is an important site. Do you know where it is? Because it's not very well marked. And he says, je ne sais pas. He has absolutely no clue. So clearly there's something, there's a trend here, right? So I guess my question to you is, do you share the concern about the secular drift of our culture? What Tim Egan calls the malnutrition of the soul. In another place he calls it the plague of modern life and spiritual complacency. Do you see secularization as an adverse force to resist?
I believe that it's a competing force. And I think he also references something that I believe is the antidote to that. And I was very struck by the phrase that he uses. It's an experience, and he captures it throughout his pilgrimage. He speaks of it being an experiencing the layers of time on consecrated ground. Experienced in the layers of time on consecrated ground. And that very much struck me when he spoke about the malnutrition of the soul, but then the significance of time. Because that really threw me back to a book that's very, very significant for me from a rabbi, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel, titled The Sabbath. And he speaks about how we each occupy space, but we share time and the sacredness of time. So to read Egan's reference of experiencing the layers of time on these consecrated spaces, it really kind of pulled it all together, that some may be more familiar with it than others in terms of the sacredness of text and the sacred knowledge that's available. But there's no denying that we share that time through generations. And in his pilgrimage, he was experiencing the layers of time upon these consecrated places that in some cases, je ne sais pas, I don't even know where it is, right?
Yeah, right.
But there's no denying that there's the connection that we have in the sacredness of time if we're willing to pilgrim together, if you will, and to journey together. And so all of that to say, I think the most important thing that someone can give to another is their time. I think that's the most precious of things that we can give. And I think he gave himself the time to take this journey, and on occasion to be lost,
right,
in order that he would experiencing those layers of time on these consecrated places. So varying levels of understanding the text and the depth of it, but the pilgrimage really is the metaphor for all of us, that we're all journeying through time and connected with those currently with us as well as those who have gone before us. And it's in that sacredness of time that we share, and that's never lost.
There is, though, an urgency on his part. I think he feels both a personal urgency in terms of where he is. He's in his early 60s. And then I think a cultural urgency, you know, like he wants to go and find God in Europe before God is lost. I mean, he says that very pointedly, you know, this sense that, you know, particularly in France, where, you know, he does mention the sort of the anti-clerical, you know, strain that is there as a result of the revolution. But, you know, this concern about losing things, about his children losing things, you know, I think that's a very real concern for him in this book. And
oh, agreed.
yeah.
And there's, because of his age, not that he's ancient, but he's certainly in the back nine, I guess, of his life, if you will. And so there is an urgency in his own time clock, not only as God, but maybe as my time running out. And so I've been wrestling with all of this. One of the people that he mentions throughout the book, if I may, is this Father Steve Sundborg. Steve Sundborg is a friend of mine, and I did not know Steve was referenced in the book until I started to reading this. And so I've worked with Steve. Steve's the president, well, he's finishing 24 years as president of Seattle University. And I wrote to Steve and mentioned to Steve, you know, and Steve spoke about what Steve's known for years since he was when Tim was a young man. And I got the sense, Steve mentioned some comments about Tim's obvious wrestling with his faith, with the church, the urgency of time, the sacredness and what that's all about. But we both agreed that he continues to be open, I find, right? I think he's, it's all, he's not, there's no certainty with him, right. but he embraces the ambiguity. And I like another thing that he speaks about himself, which really I think is an invitation for all of us. He calls himself a listening lapsed Catholic.
Right. Nice alliteration.
I really like that, right? That he's still open, so he's listening while the clock is ticking right. on culture, in the church, in his own life, but he remains open, and I think that's an invitation for all of us to be listening, to be journeying together, and maybe we all want certainty, but it's just the openness to continue to embrace the ambiguity, right? And it's in that ambiguity that I think that we look around at the other pilgrims, if you will. Right. And so anyway, not to philosophize too much on that, but
that's fine. You may philosophize.
That he takes that. I think he really invites us to go on the journey, not just through the three countries, but it's this a pilgrimage, if you will. It's a metaphor for life in many respects, right?
Well, I want to move on to talk a little bit about you and in your role as president of the university, that you spend a lot of time and energy shepherding your students, both academically and spiritually. And in that capacity, you must learn about their concerns, their challenges, their aspirations. And we certainly learn a lot from Tim about what his reservations are about the church, and certainly about his children's kind of lack of sense of it being immediately relevant to them. But I want to know from you, what do you sense are your students' reservations, challenges, and hopes in relationship to the Catholic Church?
I would characterize it as they're looking for accompaniment versus rules, and they want to be journeyed with, if you will, in terms of their own pilgrimage, and to be invited into that accompaniment. And I think that our students at Rockhurst and young folk at universities all over and beyond universities, and in their struggles with the church, and some would say, we can look to all the statistics from the pew and say, okay, the nuns, they're spiritual but not religiously affiliated, and how that has increased exponentially. And for many, the church has become irrelevant. I think they've not rejected. It's just irrelevant. For the historical context, for the students that I journey with, is they never were around at a time when the church was not in crisis.
Good point.
So if you think of, from the fallout, if you say, from 2002, well, the students who are 20, 22 years of age, they don't remember anything but.
Yes, right.
So their rejection is not because of the scandals necessarily. I mean, clearly they know of that, but they've never known anything but that. What I think their bigger issue, from my estimation, is where do we start? And if I'm going to be a member of this church, do I start, these are the rules in order to belong, or do I start an accompaniment? And I think we look to the example of Jesus, who repeatedly starts with accompaniment. It's not, and I'm not saying we throw out the rules of the church. I'm not, I don't want people calling into the podcast after the podcast and saying, "Oh, that's great, you had someone on here and say, forget the rules of the church." I'm not saying that, but think of what Jesus said in terms of, I'm not come here to reject, but to fulfill the law. And so if we want people to be members, I think we look to the examples of this Jesus who sees this scoundrel in a tree who's ripping people off by the name of Zacchaeus, and he doesn't say, look, let me give you the whole list of things that you're not abiding by, but rather, I want to have dinner with you. Or he walks 7 miles out of his way to go to Emmaus in order to accompany people. Or he meets the woman at the well and, you know, it's, no, I want to be with. And so I think that we also look to the example of Francis. That's what he's saying, to go to the margins. Accompany. Start with accompaniment. The rules can follow. So I think there might be a prescription there in terms of that's all any of us is asking is walk with me. Because when you walk with me, I'm not alone, and I'm in this with someone, and therein lies the virtue of hope. So that to me is what I think is I find instructive. The rules will always be there, just like the ancient text and the things that, you know, Tim Egan was so concerned about, you know, wanted to see, and a lot of them, gosh, there'll be a time when no one knows about that. You know, the rules will be there, and we clearly have the rules, but what are we trying to do here? Are we trying to walk and accompany with folks and then get to the rules? I think so. That's my point in terms of where do we start.
Well, certainly, I think he does spend enough time in the book talking about his son and his daughter, both of whom he has reservations about he has regrets, honestly, to be honest with me.
Yes.
About not raising them in the faith in the way he was raised, with sort of the foundation. He considers them illiterate in the sense of kind of knowing the basics. And yet his son argues with him, you know, because Tim himself says, I'm tired, I don't want to be an agnostic. That's too squishy, right? And yet his son counters and says, well, look, it's intellectually honest. Yes. You know, he has this line, which is more lazy, claiming you know without evidence or waiting to be convinced. And then his daughter, who, you know, and again, it's interesting that you talk so much about accompaniment. He invites his daughter, he invites his son, he invites his wife, who is Jewish, on different legs of the journey. So it's an invitation. Obviously, it's a very physical invitation, but it's also he also wants to check with them and see are they being changed by this experience? Is there some kind of transformation? And his daughter, I think, comes to the conclusion that she doesn't know if she believes in God, but she talks about what she does believe in. You know, she believes that she says she doesn't have a text or a Bible, but I know I believe in family, friends, love, community, all the things we would all see as positive. Is that where you start with students who are sort of in the same state of wrestling? Is that where you start with them in terms of it's about family, it's about friends, it's about love, it's about community, which is, she articulates that to her father.
She does, very well, very thoughtfully. Yes, he invites them to journey with him, and they both do, and then his wife does as well. When I speak about accompaniment and membership, if you will, I believe our students are regular churchgoers. And I believe they're regular churchgoers in what I call the cathedral of the streets.
Okay.
And to those points about community, neighbor, family, the community of the streets, our students are very, very comfortable in the shelters, in the soup kitchens, in the food pantries. Well, and that's just, they're very naturally inclined to that. In those experiences, in those cathedral of the streets, as I call them, that's where the accompaniment, and that's where the conversations are very, very rich, much like the conversations that he had with his son and his daughter. Because in that, they then go into, okay, the sacred text, the rules, the pieces of this. But it's really in those opportunities that are so rich that they allow you to go to those deeper levels. I think I was very touched by those that he was open to their thoughts, and they were very much with him, but they accompanied him in those experiences. But to our students, it is those cathedral of the streets experiences, which I think for them, they pack it in. And they're very, very they move very easily in that. And I find when I accompany them in our service immersion and all of those things, or in my class of Catholic social teaching, and we go to a lot of these fields, they're so natural in that.
One of the, speaking of his wife, she's Jewish, and they have conversations about faith, because I gather from my reading that she's a practicing Jewish congregant. And they have different views on the afterlife. Obviously, he's been raised with the Catholic interpretation, and she has the Jewish, which is, that if you've been a good person, it's how you will be remembered. That will be the afterlife. And he says, that between them, that kind of goes back and forth, that they have these discussions. Then they're sort of, sometimes they're confrontational, but more often they're like gathering from each other's traditions, and he doesn't shy from that. He doesn't mind doing that at all. Does that opportunity present itself at Rockhurst with students or not? And how do you deal with students from different faiths?
So his description of when he has that encounter with his wife, and she is quite knowledgeable, and I mean she's basically rebutting some of his diminishments of things, and then he describes it as where we each chiseling away at others' theological foundations, but then he says, but adding to them as well. And to that point, to adding to them as well is, yes, I find that they very much share their experiences, their understanding. So in my class of Catholic social teaching, there are several in there who are non-Catholic. So they're taking a class in Catholic social teaching, which is not required. It's fulfilling some other requirements, maybe in global studies or whatever. And they're intrigued by that, but what really resonates with them is this notion of human dignity and common good. And that provides a platform that really speaks about, so my experience as a Sikh, or my experience as a Muslim, or this in our Hindu tradition, or this in our Jewish tradition. To me, it's really the language that is a good place to start. In fact, I make this claim at the beginning of class and at the end of the semester that this is really the way for us to proceed in that dialogue. And they're like, yeah, this is a church that I want to be a part of, right? So I find that very, very instructive from them. And I also think of, even in my experiences in the community as the president of the school, going out and doing a lot of engagement in the larger business community, and people of course know, I'm a Catholic Jesuit priest, and they come up and they'll say, repeat, I like your Pope.
Yeah, right.
We've never had it, and I said, why? Why do you like it? Oh, I really like, And I literally just had a Jewish friend from the chamber board who called me to say he just read the Pope's book recently, who Let Us Dream, and he was just so excited with he and his wife, and he couldn't wait to call me to talk about it, and just said, so anyway, there's so much we can learn from one another, and it's a learning from one another if we're willing to journey with one another.
It reminds me of what he learns from Benedict, which is to listen, to actually listen, as opposed to putting up barriers and begin refuting someone as they're talking, to actually listen, in the process, something good can happen. Well, we've talked a lot about the book today. I kind of want to talk about you, since you're no stranger to undertaking a pilgrimage, and you've done both. You've traveled the Camino de Santiago and also the Inca Trail leading to Machu Picchu. So I think our listeners would like to know how those experiences have challenged you, have inspired you, and transformed you.
Okay. Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, that in many respects, those journeys, those pilgrimages, the Camino for me was a metaphor for life. It really was the case for me that you do a third, a third, a third. The first third, you're very focused upon the physical piece of it, because it's a bit of a stretch to walk 18, 20 miles a day. And now I didn't walk as much as he did. I walked from the Pyrenees Mountains to Santiago and then to Finisterre. So we did 550 miles, just a half, but it was decent amount of movement.
Sure.
And probably 18, 20 some miles a day. The first week or so, you are the first third of it, you're very focused upon just the endurance, you know, the blisters, the whole, how much you carry, because everything you own, you need, is on your back. So the first third truly is much like in our life. You know, we're trying to get ourselves into a rhythm physically. The second third of the pilgrimage is often you really go deeper into what are these places you're seeing, the sacredness of them, how they speak to you, and you become deeper in your intellectual curiosity. Mm-hmm. And then the last third, you really do for the sake of your soul. Now, the Camino de Santiago, been around over 1,000 years, and pilgrimages, so they're the three most popular pilgrimages are to Jerusalem, to Rome, and then to Santiago. But today, 70% of the people who do the Camino de Santiago do it for non-spiritual reasons. And that really struck me, you know.
Non-spiritual or non-religious?
Non-religious, I'm sorry. Non-religious,
okay,
thank you.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay,
I'm sorry. No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
Yes, modification.
Because I have a sense that there is a spiritual motivation.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. I appreciate that. Absolutely, right. So, because at the completion of it, you say, like, when you get your Compostela, the certificate, they ask, why did you do it? You know, for a hike, for, you know, to read, whatever. Right. And then, just most of those are for non-religious reasons. But what I found in my experience there was, even where, yes, a significant number were doing it, was kind of bucket list, or to forget, or to do it with their sibling, or with the child. Clearly there was a transformation going on through that. Mm-hmm. So that when we got to Santiago, and got to the cathedral and the experience there, and of course you're just, you know, Santiago, it's this mantra, you know, buen camino, buen camino. For me, why did I do it? I did it, I thought, for religious reasons, and the question I had for myself is, what do I really need in life? How much do I need? You know, what's really, so I didn't bring a watch, I didn't bring anything electronic, I didn't, like, no camera. I just didn't know it, but it's less. And literally, as you're going on, you're getting rid of this. I don't need 4 shirts. I don't need 3 shirts. I don't need 2, you know. Mm-hmm. Plus, it makes your bag a little lighter for practical reasons. And the question changed for me. Mm-hmm. You know, well, I shouldn't say, the answer changed. The answers. Mm-hmm. Because it was less about, you know, what do I need and things. And when I got to Santiago and was given the privilege of being able to kind of celebrate the Mass, and some of the people who started didn't know I was a priest.
Interesting.
So, you know, it's like, well, and then, you know, come out and kind of celebrate. And, but there we are, packed in the cathedral, and there's an experience where they have this incense, or this, and it's called this borafumero. It's 5 feet high and weighs, I don't know, 80, 90 pounds. And they have 6 or 7 people that swing it through the cathedral. It's just incredible. And it fills the cathedral with the incense, and the thing is swinging from floor to ceiling, and it's quite a sight to see. But the tears came down out of my eyes there at that moment, because what I realized is what I need is everyone around me, and that we're all smelly pilgrims. Mm-hmm. That we all stink. And that the perfume of the incense, if you will, softens that a bit. But that's what we share, and so you need those who were problematic on this journey, those that had. So that to me is that, you know, that when you journey with someone, you recognize that you really, the need of one another, that companionship, right, that community. So
well, that sort of segues nicely into my last question, which is that for all of us, in terms of needing other people, this pandemic has been, figuratively speaking, like a trek through unfamiliar terrain. And Tim Egan certainly talks about the challenges, as you just mentioned, the physical and then the emotional, psychological, and spiritual challenges. But he also found places of comfort and solace. Usually he would tuck himself away in a monastery or a chapel, or he would take a walk in nature. What for you have been the challenges of this pandemic pilgrimage? And also, what have been the places or the moments of refuge and comfort for you during this time?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? I mean, the irony of it that this has compelled us to isolate. It has, and in that isolation, though, there's been these extraordinary opportunities again to what is it that do I need and what fulfills me, and the frustration of the isolation, but also the educational component of the isolation. And what I'm being instructed in is how much we need one another, and especially how we need one another, especially those who are in harm's way and those who have been left out. And so our whole being confronted with the division politically, the division racially, all of this, I think, is instructing us and instructing us in that, how do I see one another? Do I see another truly as my sister and my brother? And am I really helping to be a part of the beloved community? So it's been tough, and I think of that, you know, how much more, not just I need to do, but how much more vulnerable I need to be in order to be a part of this beloved community. So I've appreciated the quiet time. I've also very much missed the social time.
Sure.
But I am an introvert, so I do draw a lot of energy from being alone. But I greatly miss the opportunities on campus to just be with students. I always would have lunch with them, to go to the games, and it's just, you know, we're all distanced in order that there can be a greater longing for us to be with one another, but to really be with one another and to really see one another as sister and brother.
Well, thank you so much, Father Curran. We've come to the conclusion of our second episode on A Pilgrimage to Eternity, and we hope you will join us for the third episode, in which I'll be talking with Mary Spence, educator, visitation parishioner, and pilgrimage veteran. I want to thank Father Tom again for participating in today's conversation, and also thank members of the Faith Formation team who lent their support, especially Tasha Betts. The team would love your feedback on this and other episodes, so please feel free to leave a comment. Thank you.